Let's go ahead and call this work session to order this evening. And the first item on our agenda is board and commission interviews, and we have no one this evening to interview. So we'll take a look at the regular agenda and ask if there's anything on the regular agenda anyone wants to discuss at this point. If not, we'll turn to meeting and issue updates, and I'll just look to my right and start out with Katie.
No, thank you.
Emerson.
I have nothing to do.
Pam.
Same, no updates.
Laura.
Believe it or not, I don't either.
Okay, Neil.
I'd like to break the line here, but I can't. I have nothing to report.
Marie.
No, ma'am, let's get at it.
Okay.
Sarah? Wow.
Sarah.
No updates for me.
Oh, whoa. Well,
That's
I've got
unanimous.
one, okay?
Oh, thank goodness.
Yeah, just something. Who's going to the MML conference in February? Okay, we need to organize ourselves soon because we want to take good advantage of that afternoon time and set up some meetings with some legislators and see what we can do to move things along. Before then, I can update us with some of the legislative actions because the MML immunity, everybody's talking about what's going on in the legislature, but it's a little bit too early to get too panicked. And so I also wanted to tell you that at the Metro Mayor's meeting last week, there were a couple of interesting things that came up. Most of the cities are using the ARPA funds to fill in the gap in their deficits and are not planning on big spending programs. They're just using it to fill in. And I wanted to point that out to you. There was also a really good discussion about communicating with the public. And many of the cities have gone to increased mailings. One of them has gone to monthly mailings because they're finding that they reach the population a little bit better than just sticking to social media. So I wanted to pass that on, that was almost everybody that was there at the meeting. There must have been 16 mayors. Everybody was doing some sort of regular newsletter mailing. So I wanted to share that. All right, let's go on to our topic tonight, which is our compensation and classification study overview. And would you like to introduce our guest?
I would, and if you would come stand there, that would be great. And actually, I'll let her introduce herself. But what I want to share is, so this is McGrath Consulting, and we gave some information about it originally. And I want to save all the time so that she has time to present and for questions and answers. But I do want to say that it has been an absolute delight to work with McGrath Consulting. The process has been incredibly smooth. The data collected has been incredibly rich. So I think you'll be pleased with the data presented tonight. I'm hoping that there will be a lively conversation. It's a lot to absorb. This is the only time that the consultants will be on site, but we can certainly take any follow-up questions as they come to you later and get additional information. And as I've also shared with you all, they're staying over. And so we greatly appreciate that. And so there will be 2 in-person sessions for staff tomorrow to additionally ask some questions. They'll also be on Zoom, as we shared with COVID, and not everybody can leave their workstation. So staff will have a multitude of ways to participate. And it will also be recorded, so those staff that aren't available will be able to watch it later. So with that and no further ado,
Good evening, everybody. My name is,
And just real
go
quick,
ahead.
Councilmember Richardson, can you see it in presentation form? Okay, good, perfect. Here we go.
Great, super. Well, good evening. My name is Melena Halverson Mays, and I am one of the consultants with McGrath Human Resources Group. I want to thank you for the opportunity to meet with the body this evening. It's nice being able to do face-to-face in-person contact because a lot of our projects have gone virtual, and I really desire to be on site with the organizations that we work with. This has been a pretty phenomenal project for us. And what I'm going to do here this evening is just give you an overview of the project. There is an executive report that will give you maybe a little bit more information. And so I'm just going to give you the highlights here this evening on our respective study. Just a quick brief on McGrath and who we are. We are a public sector consulting firm located out of Wonder Lake, Illinois. I personally live in Wisconsin, and so I appreciate the 50-degree temperatures that I came into this afternoon. But I understand I brought the cold with me, and it's going to settle in tomorrow. We have two different sides of our company. We have a human resources side, which is where I predominantly do most of my work, and then we also have a public safety component as well. We do police, fire, and EMS studies as well. I do get borrowed out to the public safety side from time to time, but predominantly I work on the human resources side, and we do mostly compensation and benefit studies for public sector municipalities all across the United States, and many of which have been in the state of Missouri. I'm not going to read this for you verbatim, but I want to at least craft for you what the purpose of the study was before we get into what my findings were. Overall, we were asked to come in and take a look at the city's compensation system. And number one, take a look at your wages, how you're paying your employees or how you're paying your positions in comparisons to the external market. We'll talk about who that external market is here in a little bit. We were also then asked to take a look at your positions and do a position analysis so that we could make sure that positions were properly compensated, not only in terms of what the market is paying them, but also from an internal perspective, if across departments you might have like or similar type positions. So we were asked to take a look and analyze that. Along with then comes other issues, compensation issues like compression and those types of how do we solve those particular problems. So with that, then we have provided the city with a new compensation system that is in alignment with the market and does consider internal comparability. We've also given the city some policy recommendations so that they can be taking those recommendations and pushing them out to the elected body here at such time as they determine we should be doing so. The last part of our project, we're not quite done yet. Chandler is in HR. He's going to continue to see me for a little bit because we're going to be developing your job descriptions next. And we will also then be finalizing your FLSA designations, which helps us determine then who should be paid overtime and who is exempt from that. That's the last phase of our project. So when we start working on a compensation study, we have a very set methodology that we utilize. And the first thing that we do is we come on site and we, or sometimes it's virtual, but in this case, we were on site so that we could meet administration and get an understanding of the programs and services that the city offers to their constituents. And that helped us then have an understanding of what each position is responsible for. That way, when we go out to the external market, we are able to compare an apples to apples comparison of roles and responsibilities, and we feel confident then in what our market ratings are. After that, we take a really deep dive look into all of your data, your compensation data and your policies, your job descriptions, anything that touches compensation for employees. We include that into our analysis. And we also engage the employees in this process. We asked for each position to complete a position questionnaire that gives us much more meaningful information about what their roles and responsibilities are, because job descriptions sometimes don't necessarily give you everything, and sometimes job descriptions are simply out of date. So we collected many position questionnaires, and that helped us then do that position analysis to determine, is there maybe a different hierarchy within an organization or some career ladder opportunities here at the city. We collected data from 27 different public organizations, and we will talk about, I'll throw those on the screen here in just a moment. And when we were all done with our recommendations, we came back here. And we met with your city administration, and then we met with each of your department directors again, and we gave them an opportunity to take a look at those recommendations. So at this point, our recommendations have been pretty well vetted. We feel very, very confident in our salary recommendations. All right.
I'm sorry. That was me.
Okay.
Come on.
All right. Very briefly then, these are the comparable organizations that we utilize. So of the organizations that we discussed, who are you losing your who are you losing your human capital to? Who are you competing against for that human capital? This is the list that was developed. We developed this collaboratively with your administration and all of the department directors, and you will find that they are all local organizations, local to the region, and some fire protection districts as well. All right, first thing we're going to do is get into a summary of what we found of the market. If I were to come here and say you need to change your salaries, you're probably going to say, well, show me the data. And so I'm going to give you a couple of graphs that will explain that. And when you see that, there's a term that I need you to understand, and that's what's called a comp ratio. A comp ratio then is we take Webster Groves wages and we compare them against the average market. And that is a formula that we use. So when you're looking at that number, that comp ratio is that comparison, and we want that number to be as close to 50% as possible, okay? 50% means average market. If you are plus or minus 10%, we consider that to be competitive with the market, although right now here today, probably 40 to 44% comp ratios may not necessarily be as market competitive as they were a couple of years ago. We're in a very, very brutal competitive market right now for our human capital. So when you look at those numbers, be thinking about as close to 50% as possible is as close to market as you can get. So the first analysis that we did was our minimums. Yep. And the minimums, what we found overall, we compared your higher rates against all of those other organizations and their higher rates for the like positions. We found that overall 40% of your positions, that minimum or that starting rate is too far under the market. They have a comp ratio of less than 40%. So 60% is aligned to the market, but in yellow, you will see that, and I don't know if I dare use my clicker, but you'll see that there's a yellow bar. That's 15% of those positions that are in that 40 to 44%. So they're doing okay, but if we don't do something with them pretty soon, they're going to fall too far away from the market to be competitive going forward. So we pay attention to that. Then
you may have said it already, but the numbers at the top of the bar, 4.7%. What's the 4 again?
Sure. So thank you for that. We had to benchmark positions. We weren't able to collect data on every position.
Okay.
So that would tell you 4 positions or 7% of the benchmark positions was less than a 29% comp ratio.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. The next thing that we then took a look at was your midpoints. So there is oftentimes an assumption that your midpoint of your salary schedule should be aligned with the market. And what indeed did we find? That you're really split down the middle 50-50. At midpoint, half of your positions are not market competitive, and at midpoint, half of them are, although we still have to pay attention to that other 15% that they're at risk of no longer being market competitive if we don't do something. Oops, I skipped ahead. Lastly, and I do want to just kind of take this with a grain of salt, is our maximums, because every organization can set their maximums the way that they desire to do so. But I took a look at your maximums, and what I found was that about a third of your positions, 34% of your positions, will be able to meet the average market maximums in other organizations, okay? Which means that in Webster Groves, you've got about a third of the positions that will maybe be able to earn as much, if not more, than the external market. However, you have 41% that never will. If they stay with their position at Webster Groves, on average, they will not be able to earn what you can earn in other locations at the maximum. So that can be a challenge for retention purposes. So this isn't the end all. What these 3 graphs really tell us is that you have a portion of your positions that are doing okay, and you have a portion of your positions that are going to need some adjustment. But the ultimate graph, the one that I feel is most important and most reflective of your market right now, is when we take a look at your actual employees and what they are earning in comparisons to the other actual employees in those other 27 organizations. This is what we found. Overall, 1/3 of your positions, okay, are under the market. That's based on where your incumbent rates of pay currently are. And you've got then 68% of them that are aligning to the market, with about 13%. They're in that cusp, or they're in that 40 to 44%. Now, what that tells me is that you're doing okay. Compensation wise, when you look at this, you would think that you're doing okay. But there are some things that you have to be thinking about. Number one is the tenure of your staff. And because they are, if the longer they're here, probably the more they are progressed through those salary ranges. So you have to be thinking about tenure. You have to be thinking about the frequency of your salary adjustments and performance impacts. So overall, the majority of your employees are doing okay, but you have a third of your workforce that is not. And that certainly then is problematic. All right, before we move on to other information, I just want to point out, we were asked to take a look at the union positions as well. And what we found, they are not necessarily in the statistics or that analysis that I just provided to you. So overall, what we found with the two positions or the two classifications that are collectively bargained is that their comp ratios, and I'm showing them to you in totality, exceeds 50% with the exception of the incumbent fire captain positions. What that tells me then is that your wages that you're currently paying within your collective bargaining unit are at market, if not just a touch above. So you are being very competitive with your firefighter, paramedic, and your fire captain positions. This is going to become important when we get to the recommendations of your command staff, because your command staff are suffering some compression here. And what I've provided to you then are specific organizations that provided us their fire data.
So just so I'm clear, the
Yes.
data you showed us before excluded the fire department.
That is correct.
All right, thank you.
That is correct. All right, so that's our market. Now, what else did we find? We found a couple of things. First of all, you have your current model that you have has 43 unique pay ranges for 59 classifications, which basically means that just about every position has its own pay range, and they're all very inconsistent. Some of them are very narrow, some of them are very wide, and so it was difficult for us to find the market, and that makes it difficult for recruiting purposes because we don't know what your competitive salary really does need to be. The other issue, the other major challenge here was that your current classifications model, it lacks internal comparability. So you might have a laborer in a parks department and a laborer in the public works department that have the same type of skill set, but they have two different pay ranges. And for the purposes of equity, we would want them to be a little bit more closely aligned. So those were some of the challenges that we saw, along with, we've got some compression. We'll talk about that again. There are some other areas or some other issues that are completely out of your control. And this goes to more on a nationwide basis, what's happening, and many public sector employers are experiencing this. The first one is that there is a gap of applicants for public sector positions. And at the last statistic that was published, that gap is at 37%, meaning that there's more positions and less applicants. And that's because by and large in public sector, the days of someone coming in and being a public sector employee for the rest of their career is by and large done. Most individuals are, they're stopping in public sector for a period of time and then they move on to something else. And this is a real challenge because there's a real need for these positions to be filled. And in addition to that, you've got 1 in 5 of your local government employees that are leaving their employment. That's local level only. That excludes state and that excludes the schools. This is local. And this number was pre-COVID. I'm waiting to see what the new number is going to be after COVID. And we'll see what, if there's been a drastic change to that number. But this is a challenge because this is affecting all municipalities all across the United States. You have some additional challenges here. You're in the St. Louis area. You have other comparable organizations that are very close to you within very close driving distance that pay very competitive wages, and they have established their compensation philosophy at above market. They want to make sure that they're paying their employees above market, and you're competing against that You're in a very, very tight industry right now. On top of with the great resignation of 2021 that everyone talks about, we have a lot of individuals who've left the workforce, and your employees and your applicants, they have choice. They have choice in the public sector and the private sector. And so whereas you're not normally always competing with the private sector, in fact, most of the time you're not, because we don't necessarily have the same types of positions between private and public. There are some, but not all. You are now starting to compete with the private sector.
But excuse me, question.
Yes, sir.
So do we know what our turnover rate is?
I do not know what your turnover rate is, no.
We looked into that last time.
Yeah.
9% or something.
We do. That was provided about a month ago, but we can resend that information.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
The last piece of information that I think is really important, just so that you have a more of a global understanding of your organization right now, are your demographics. What I did was you have two charts here, and the top left-hand chart is showing all of your employees by age, and then they're separated on the bottom by their years of service. No, I flipped that. I'm sorry. Years of service is on top and their age is on the bottom. So what we have found is that you have, if you notice on the top left-hand side, you will have individuals that are age 50 and over that have tremendous tenure. This is why you have your incumbents. You've got about 68% of your incumbents that seem to be doing okay in terms of compensation. They've been here for a really long time. Your average tenure here is 11.4 years. Nationally right now, it's about 6.5 years in the public sector. So you are beating that curve. But what's going to happen, this makes up 38% of your workforce. And what's going to happen is that they're going to start to retire. They're all eligible for the state retirement system. And when they hit that eligibility period, they're going to go. And so the city can expect that you're going to continue to have turnover, and your HR department is going to constantly be recruiting for that reason. On top of that, what I'd like to point out is, I'm going to try to do the red clicker here. Is it the top left, the top one here?
The middle one.
The middle one?
Round one. Might not show up on those.
It won't show on the screen. If you take a look at on the far left-hand side on the average years of service, you see 2.38 and 5.54. That is individuals who are under the age of 40. This is your mobile workforce. These are the individuals that they don't feel committed to an organization. They're willing to leave because they know what their worth and their value is, and they're going to go. And if you look at their service level, you'll see that you're only keeping them a handful of years before they go. That is becoming more typical of your workforce. And then smack dab in the middle, you've got the Generation X. You've got the age 40 category, which makes up yet the other 1/3 of your workforce. They have a good tenure with the organization. And that's because this group of individuals, they have a skill set, they have some experience, and they're the ones that are being unsolicited called from other employers saying, you have a skill set, we want you to come work for us. And so the big takeaway here is, number one, the city is going to just continue to have turnover because you have some retirements coming. But number two, because you're going to also have turnover with that mobile generation, you need to make sure that your wages are market competitive, because even though you're doing well now with the tenure of your personnel, the tenure of your personnel is going to go down. They're going to retire, and you need to be ready for that. All right. Next, let's talk about compensation philosophy, and then we'll get into the recommendations. What is a compensation philosophy? And I'm going to read a part of this to you. It's the organization's commitment of compensation to its employees. The goal then of compensation is to attract, retain, and motivate your qualified people. And a consistent philosophy sets the direction for determining your compensation package. Many organizations determine that they're going to develop a policy that says this is where we want to set our philosophy in terms of compensation, so that in the future, when you have financial decisions in front of you, then this can be your guiding principle on how you want to compensate your employees. It makes things a little bit easier because you've already made that decision. Overall, an organization really has one of three options to choose. The first one is that you can lead the local market. You can say, I want to set the market and let all of the other organizations chase me in terms of my compensation. Okay. Very few organizations can afford to do that. you can, as an option, meet the market, knowing that then there's going to be some places that are going to pay more than you, and there's others that are going to pay a little bit less. And that's really where most of the organizations fall into place, because they want to pay a fair wage to their employees, but they can't necessarily afford to be the leader. The third option then is that you can follow the market, where you set your compensation philosophy under the market. And there are some organizations that financially have to do that. However, my thought on this is if you cannot afford to pay the market wages, what's going to happen is you're going to spend the money, but you're going to be spending the money in turnover, and you're going to be spending the money in your recruitment opportunities. And so you're going to spend the dime. It's so, there really needs to be a good look at where you're going to spend those dollars. You don't have endless money. And so you want to make sure that you're utilizing the few resources that you have in a quality manner. So as a result, my overall recommendations for the city are I have developed you a salary schedule that is based on average market compensation, average market philosophy. You're not going to be the leader, but you're not going to be the follower either. I've established a range structure. It's going to look very similar to what you have right now with a minimum and a maximum. And I've established the market rate, so we know what that compensated market rate needs to be. I've established that at 16% into the range. So you have an overall 40% range from minimum to maximum, and it's 16% in. That is what we consider the market rate to be. You have 17 pay grades instead of the 43 or 49, whatever number that was. And so because we've collapsed it now, we have an opportunity to introduce some internal alignment for your positions.
So would that 16% represent a midpoint between the minimum and maximum?
It's not a midpoint. The midpoint would surely, the midpoint would surely be 20%. So what you'll see when you see the salary schedule, and it's an appendix in the executive report, you'll see minimum, you'll see market, and then you'll see maximum. Okay. So it's going to look like it's a midpoint, but it's not calculated that way.
It's called market.
Pardon me?
It's called market.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this only takes into account salary, not any fringe benefits or culture of the organization. Is that correct?
That is correct. We'll talk very, very briefly at the end about the benefits. Yep. All right. My recommendations continued are to implement certainly the pay grades, place the positions in their respective pay grades that we've recommended. And for the employees then, because up to this point, everything has been based on position, not on the employee, right? We don't know anything about your employees. We're looking at classifications only. But now we have to place all of your employees on the new salary schedules. And if their wages are under that minimum, then the organization really does need to get them at least to that minimum, that new minimum rate. And it is my recommendation that if you can provide an increase to individuals that are already within the range, that you should do so if you are able to do that this year.
But let's say you have a long-term, not long-term, but employee that's been there 3-4 years and just bring them up to the minimum. Would that be sufficient to maintain that person?
So you're asking a very, very good question, and we're actually going to talk about it because you have an additional, I don't want to call it a concern, or there's an additional consideration, because what happens is when you bring those individuals into the minimum and then you've got maybe some long-term employees, what you're doing is you're causing in-range compression, and you might hear some rumblings about that. And so the city at some point in the future will want to take a look at that, but there's an additional layer that I'm going to recommend that you take a look at before you actually deal with the compression.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. We have given some recommendations to administration on how to manage the system going forward. We've spent a lot of time, sweat, and energy developing your new salary schedule, and we want you to be able to self-maintain that as much as you can. So we've given some parameters or some recommendations to administration on how to better manage that system going forward. We want to make sure that you are able to put some sort of a cost of living onto that range on an annual basis so that it can stay market competitive. And you'll base that on some sort of an economic indicator. And that economic indicator can be local, it can be a national CPI, We just simply say, make sure that you're consistent with your economic indicator. We also would like to see for your employees to continue to progress through the ranges. Now, historically, there has been a performance model here. Whether or not that performance model continues or not, I think is up for discussion. But if you don't do performance management, then we want to make sure the employees have some sort of a set increase each year until such time that you do decide to do true performance management. The third one ties with the periodic review with market adjustments. There are going to be times when the market has a spike. A good example is right now, 911 dispatchers in this particular area. Wow, it's going kind of gangbusters. And, what we recommend is that you do a review of your market every 3 to 5 years to get those blips that might occur. Does not have to be to the level that we did here because we've established your positions now. But every once in a while that that blip is happening and metrics will help you identify that. And if that is the case, then administration should be making a recommendation to make a classification change to accommodate a market adjustment. And we don't want you to be doing this for a position. We want you to be doing this as a classification or as a job title.
So would our turnover rate dictate when we do that?
Yep.
It might not be 3 to 5, it might be 2 to 4.
Yep, that is exactly right. And those metrics help you make that decision of when it's time, because I could say 3 to 5, but if you're having some issues, then most certainly we would want you to do it sooner. All right. As an FYI, this is the exact presentation employees are going to get tomorrow. And this slide is really just going to discuss for the employees how I've placed the positions in the salary ranges. It's not something necessarily that we need to focus on here tonight, but just know that I'll be explaining that to the employees tomorrow. All right. Part of the process that we were asked to take a look at was once we developed our recommendations to take a closer look at the equity here within the organization. And there are many different types of equity when you are looking at compensation systems. The first one is career equity, making sure that licensing, education, credentials are duly noted and accounted for in our position analysis, and we have done that now. And along with that, then making sure that those criteria are aligned with what the market would tell us that those types of positions need to be paid for. We also then took a look at the internal equity, those positions that might be similar in an organization, but they're in different departments, or perhaps even internally if the career ladder just is not maybe set up the way that we feel that it should be set up. But there's a third look, and that's what's called pay equity. This is something that has been very, very widely discussed in human resources for the past year and a half, where we start taking a look at individual pay and if there's any variances in that pay, why? So what we did was, and I'll show you a couple of slides, we took a look at, based on the recommendations and where everyone was going to be placed, what the organization looks like in terms of gender and what it looks like in terms of race, okay? Because there's going to be variances in wages, and that's okay that there's variance in wages. It could be based upon what you made at time of hire. It could be how long you've been in your position, your performance management system. There's a number of different variables, but you want to make sure that they're objective variables and that there's no other reason why maybe perhaps wages might be different. What you're seeing here is what the organization looks like by gender, okay? In blue, that is the average wage of, I'm going to use the far left-hand column, and you see D, that is pay grade D. In pay grade D, the whole average wage of all of those individuals is just over $40,000 a year. And the females in that wage, in that pay grade, is about $40,000 a year, but notice there's no males, okay? So that's how you're going to read it. And this is a good way for you to visually see that there's some variations between genders within pay grades, and you also have some pay grades that don't have certain genders at all. And that then becomes a recruitment item for the city to be considering of how they want to make sure that, that we are equal opportunity. I'll give you just a moment to take a peek at that. The other one that I did is by race. And again, in blue is the average of the pay grade on all people. And then in yellow are Caucasian, and in green is all other races. And I will say that this is based upon what the employees provided at time of hire with their EEO information. So I got this out of your payroll system. Again, that you will find that there are some variations, and you will see that there are also some areas that are strictly Caucasian and not of other races. And again, that issue is an HR, recruitment issue. There are some variations, however, and, most certainly what I would want to make sure is that the variances within the pay grades are proper variances, because they can occur and it's going to happen. We just want to make sure that they're all proper. Yeah.
Not
Yes.
to minimize the issues that we have with the gender, but it seems like we have more struggle here with race.
I would agree. I would agree.
So in terms of the different classifications, I assume the N for each classifications is going to vary pretty widely, meaning the number of people in that classification.
It could very well, yes.
Okay. I'm
And-
just
and
trying to
most-
understand what
Nope.
the numbers mean. Yeah.
Most certainly. And I think when you see the salary schedule and you can compare that, then that's going to make, it's certainly going to make a little bit more sense. But
Okay.
what you're going to find is, your labor, your unskilled is going to be on the lower pay grades. And then now you can take a look at that and look at the variation in the
Right.
in the salaries. You get into more of the technical positions, and then you can see that you're not diverse. You're not diverse in those, the technical positions, which are in the mid part of the salary structure. And there's some diversity at the department director level as well. So you can certainly see some trends. This goes to the compression question that you asked a little bit ago. And, what do we do with compression? And my recommendation in the report will be that the city might be better off at this point to do what we call a pay equity analysis. It is typically a large database that is developed, that is either put into a software system or turned over to a firm that they exclusively do this, to run an analysis on your organization to determine whether or not any additional adjustments because of race or gender should occur before you go into fixing in-range compression. Fixing in-range compression would be secondary.
So the pay equity analysis then would do that examination both within classification as well as across classification. So the number of employees in any classification then becomes irrelevant because of the way you're comparing things.
Because we can't tell, there's some variations. We don't know, well, we know when they were hired, but we don't know what their rate of pay was when they were hired, if they negotiated up into the range, what their education level was, what their performance ratings were. And that's everything that they would collect. They're going to collect everything on every employee, and they're going to run a statistical analysis on it and determine if there's any variations.
So don't be offended by this terminology,
okay.
but what I think you're suggesting is this is a crude snapshot that tells us that we have a potential problem. The pay equity analysis would give us the granular data on not only how serious the problem is, but how we might fix the problem with individual employees.
Spot on.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. All right. So last but not least, with other recommendations, you will see some title changes, and you will also see some titles that did not change. I did meet with all of the directors and I gave some recommendations. There are some titles that will not change, and I would recommend that the city do that at time of attrition. When the current incumbent employee leaves, then we can change some of those titles at that time. I do have a recommendation. Between your union and your non-union, you do have some public safety command positions that are struggling a little bit with the compression. And that is really the only compression area that I would recommend that you adjust at this time. Take a look at in-range compression at a later time after you've taken a look at the pay equity issue. All right. We were asked to take a look at your benefits, and overall, you're doing a very good job on benefits in terms of your single health plan in comparisons to the rest of the market. I will say that what we have seen in the past year is employers starting to bring back 100% paid health insurance right now. For whatever reason, that trend started to go away and now it's coming back. And so you're doing very, very well in comparisons on the single plan, not so good with the family plan. And you are struggling with a lot of other organizations as well. But when you are at the bottom of the market in terms of the family premium for employees. And so my recommendation on that is, work with your broker on some long-term options. Of course, there's dollars that are associated with health plan changes, plan design changes. And, I think first and foremost, primary is the wages. Benefits are something that you will have to take a look at over a period of time.
Should they be looked at in unison, I guess?
Pardon me?
Or should that be looked at in unison as far as the cost of the family coverage to the increase in their salary range?
I would say no, because you don't necessarily know who needs family and who needs single. And so you don't want to make it, you don't want to make a salary decision based on what level of plan they take.
Right.
There's some other opportunities for you. When you read through the report, you'll see that I've got some vacation and some sick time recommendations for some adjustments. I did not put on the screen here, but you also are pretty ripe right now for a paid time off program, because the vacation could get restructured a little bit, and because your sick time likely needs to be restructured so that you have an affordable program. Because of that, the city may want to consider just revamping your paid time program into simply PTO. That way your managers don't have to necessarily be the paid time police. We don't have to worry about whether or not someone is sick or not sick. You get PTO and then you use it at your discretion. So that'll be listed in the report. Do you have any questions that I can answer at this time?
Wow.
I'm sorry. I know it's a lot to take in.
No, it is a lot, but it's really interesting. And will we get the executive summary report soon?
Yes,
Okay.
you will.
Because I think that'll be really useful.
We'll be making some decisions before budget time.
Yes, we're going to have to. And actually tonight during closed session, I have some policy recommendations that I would like to share
Okay.
based off of the consultant's recommendations.
Okay.
Now, as far as the healthcare conversation and changes, I don't know that those conversations will align with budget time. We will most likely, it's going to depend on our dates and our rates and the systems that we're already in. So we'll start looking at that.
Okay.
And will we get a copy of the presentation today?
I can
Thank you.
send all of that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Right, that would be very useful.
Did in reviewing all the other entities that surround us, have they done something similar where they've done a market analysis like this? Do you know?
So we have worked with the city of Clayton and the city of Kirkwood, and we've also worked with the city of St. Charles. I know that Wentzville, just up the road, they're going to be working on one. O'Fallon is currently working on one. And the reason why that is happening, and that's just the ones that I know off the top of my head right now, this is a very, very tight competitive market. And everyone knows it. And so in this particular region, the St. Louis region, the municipalities, they are very much on top of this, and they're doing this every few years. Yes.
So, this kind of goes back, you were talking about this with the PTO and vacation and then the healthcare and everything, but how much of an employee or potential employee's decision to either come to the organization or stay with the organization is predicated on salary versus all the other factors such as the fringe benefits and the cultural dynamic of the organization?
Right. It's going to largely depend on the employee or the applicant, because there are going to be some individuals that they care about the wage only, And then there are going to be others that say, well, we get loggers, and there's a benefit to that because they understand the value of that, along with perhaps health insurance because they have a family. And, maybe they're a little bit more established in their life and they're looking more at, this is what I need for retirement. So I need these benefits. I need less wage. But the reality is that everyone comes with a different story and a different need. And by and large, the majority of individuals are going to say, Webster Groves is going to offer me this much for this wage, and this community is going to offer me this much for this wage. And if it's so far off, I'm going to go this place. But if it's not too far off, and I like Dr. Peoples and I like, where she's going with the organization, I might decide that I'm going to go to Webster Groves. And that's when some of those non-tangibles then become very, very important in what you can offer an individual.
And is there a generational divide in that too? Like, are the younger generations, is it more salary based versus cultural or fringe benefits based?
I don't know that it's generational. I mean, it might be because, the closer you are to retirement, their financial decisions are, might be different than a recent college graduate who needs to pay off their college loans, right?
Mhm.
But there are other socioeconomic differences as well, because the labor workforce is probably going to look at it a little bit differently than, say, an engineer. Okay, and that's the reality. So I think you can really slice this a lot of different ways. Yep.
There was no mention of loggers in here at all. How does that impact someone's decision to come and work for us?
Well, the fact that you have loggers, and most everybody does, it becomes almost like a mute issue. They might look to see, do you have a contribution or not? And but by and large, that's really not a factor. When you get into those state retirement systems, as long as you're providing the loggers or you're offering it, everything else just really becomes de minimis.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else have a question? Oh, there's a lot here to digest.
There is.
Appreciate this.
So Mayor, I wanted to expand on Councilman Franklin's question. So as you know, engaging the comp and class study, it's something that had been in the works for quite some time, even before I got here, and it was something we dusted off the shelf and did. To my knowledge, I could not find evidence that the city had done an expansive comp and class ever before. The typical practice has been calling other municipalities and getting pay grade information, which is not a bad practice, but it does not take the entire system into account. And so I'm really excited not only about the recommendations, but the things that we can put in place, because as we've talked about, we've got some really difficult discussions to have in terms of our policies, some of our sick leave, vacation, those things that we'll discuss further tonight that pay more on the back end. And so as we've talked about before, perhaps we need to invest more on the front end, especially now that we are seeing turnover. And thank you, as you shared, that this is not uncommon for municipalities and that we are competing with the private sector. We've got to figure out a way, if that is a value, how do we front load some of our salaries, particularly in some of the key positions? And it all comes at a cost. It has to have some balance to it. So looking forward to additional conversation in this area.
Well, and the state's effectively, I mean, I shouldn't say they're doing as detailed of a job, but with the 5.5% that's proposed, and granted, our state is way underpaid, but it just adds an additional competitive aspect to local municipalities too.
It does. And I love keeping up with CPI. That has been a really good past practice. And I'm not suggesting we should or shouldn't do it, but this year's CPI is, I believe, around 7%.
Yeah, it's too high.
We can't do 7%.
Yeah.
So, what is that
6.9.
baseline? How do we manage it moving into it? And healthcare is a huge factor. Our healthcare, I believe our rates went up, I may be off a little bit, but like by 3% this year. Where are we going to continue to be with healthcare? Because that is a value for employees. So perhaps wages aren't as high over here, but we've got really good healthcare coverage. But there's a lot of factors that go into it.
Mhm.
So thank you very much. I know we needed this, and I know some of the folks who aren't with us now really were pushing to do this, as you said. And so I'm really glad we've moved forward with this.
Very good. Thank you.
What
for
part
your
of
time.
Wisconsin?
Chippewa Falls, which is about 90 minutes dead east of Minneapolis.
It's cold up there, I bet right now.
It is. When I get home, it's going to be about 20 below. So I'm okay to stay here a little longer.
Do
Yeah.
you have a favorite Leinenkugels?
Well, Lining Kugels is in my community, Chippewa Falls. That's where Liney's is made. And I don't like
Do you like spotted cow?
It's funny.
Spotted cow.
Thank you.
Don't worry, no
Thank
one
you
at home will
very
be
much.
watching this video.
All right, now, are we going back into closed session at this
We are.
point? Okay, so that's what we're going
Personnel?
to do.
Is that the,
Personnel and.
And contract.
and contract?
Thank
Okay.
you.
Mayor, I'd like to call for an executive closed session regarding attorney-client, no, sorry, not that. Number 3, personnel, Missouri statute 610.021, open paren 3, close paren. Number 4, negotiated contract, Missouri statute 610.021, open paren 12, close paren.
Second.
Mayor Welsh,
Yes.
Councilmember Arnold,
Yes.
Councilmember Bliss,
Yes.
Councilmember Franklin.
Yes.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Alexander is absent. Councilmember Richardson.
Yes.
All right. Okay,
Mayor will need to just close this Zoom, so those that are attending will be booted off and will come. You can stay at the link. It'll come back on when we're,
26 people we're going to boot off.
Yep.
Okay.
Councilmember Richardson will get you on the closed session link.
Let's come back to our regular meeting. We have 20 people with us now, and we welcome everybody this evening. And we again, because we're on Zoom with the public, if you care to speak tonight, you'll need to raise your hand through that Zoom feature, and we'll capture that. So let's start with the roll call.
Yes, Mayor. Mayor Welsh,
Here.
Councilmember Arnold,
Here.
Councilmember Bliss,
Here.
Councilmember Franklin,
Here.
Councilmember Smith,
Here.
Council Alexander is absent. Councilmember Richardson.
Here.
All right, our first agenda item is remarks of visitors. And do we have a hand up?
We do.
We do.
Williams W. You can unmute and go ahead.
Hello, my name is Walter Williams, and I am a captain paramedic with the City of Webster Groves Fire Department. I have been serving this city for 21 and a half years, been a paramedic for 22 years, and have served other communities as firefighter and a paramedic for the last 28 years total. I requested a medical exemption and was denied, and I'd like to know why. I took the vaccine. 3 months later, I was infected with the virus. I now have natural immunity and the vaccine. Why isn't natural immunity being acknowledged? They say follow the science. Why aren't they following the science of natural immunity? Speaking of silence, or science, neither the vaccine nor the booster prevents the spread or the acquisition of the virus. They are acknowledging this, so why are we still being required to obtain the vaccine and booster? As long as a person is conscious, alert, and oriented ×3, as a medic, I cannot force them to accept any medical treatment or transport them to a medical facility without their consent. My doctor cannot do this either. I can deny any and all treatments. I am aware of the consequences of not taking the booster. I feel I have the vaccine and natural immunity. Therefore, I do not need any further treatment. Also, I cannot be prescribed any medical treatment by anyone unless they are medically licensed in the state of Missouri to practice medicine. How can I be forced to accept this medical treatment? I also requested a religious exemption and was denied. Why? In my request, I referenced Genesis 1:26-31, the story of creation. For the lack of time, I will not read these scriptures. I will shorten my request. God created a wonderful body that can perform amazing things. Our bodies have the ability to heal itself. It can heal a broken bone, rid infections with fevers, create warmth while shivering, and heal wounds affecting skin. Natural immunity is a part of that creation, and it gives the body the ability to heal itself. Natural immunity gives the body the ability to identify, respond, and fight many imperfections that may enter the body, such as viruses. The flu is an example. I am not against medical interventions when needed, as God has given man the ability to help our bodies deal with things affecting it. I have taken advantage of many of those interventions myself. However, we cannot prevent all things. I am Romans 5:12 basically states that all men are going to die at some point. We do not know the time or place, but we're all going to die. So if I believe I am okay with that, why am I being forced to take a booster that I don't believe in? God has given man the ability to create medical treatments that allows us to revive life, but no matter how hard we try, if it is their time to die, we cannot revive them. Missouri Constitution, Section 1, Article 5 states that all men and women have natural and indefeasible right to worship Almighty God according to the dictates of their own conscience, that no human authority can control or interfere with those rights of conscience, that no person shall.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Williams, for your comments. Appreciate it. Are there any other hands up?
Yes, Mr. Buck.
Oh, Mr. Buck.
Thanks for this opportunity. This is for City Council's strategic planning and the 8 candidates running for office. Both our city and school district have clearly made diversity, equity, and inclusion a priority, and progress is being made on several fronts. That's great news. In honor of Dr. Martin Luther King, I have a dream that City Council and school board work together as one to solve once and for all the two biggest, toughest, and most urgent problems and racial inequities in our community with fresh thinking, new ideas, and courageous leadership. Problem one is the continuing loss and decline of Webster's Black community, part of our city's proud history for 156 years since 1866, the year after the Civil War. In 1950, during the height of the North Webster neighborhood, Blacks represented over 14% of Webster's total population. Today, that number is 4% and falling. Unchecked gentrification is forcing longtime residents out because they cannot afford to live there anymore. If we do not stop the hemorrhaging, I'm afraid that we will be an all-white Webster in less than 5 years, and that would be a very sad day for all of us. Other cities have solved this problem. There are solutions. Problem two is the over 20-year existence and continuation of the academic achievement gap between the performance of white and Black students. More than 7,800 Black students have been affected. This problem is not unique to Webster Groves, but other cities and districts have solved the problem and closed the gap with solutions such as universal preschool. There are solutions. These are not separate city or school district problems. The city needs a school district and the school district needs the city. It's all of our problem, and I'm convinced that the only way we will ever solve them is by city and school district working together as one community. We've got serious problems and we need serious people and ideas to solve them. All it takes is the will to start together and keep moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buck. Are there any other hands up?
Madam Mayor, there are not. There's just one piece of chat which I've displayed for the members so they can see.
Okay,
Congresswoman Bush's office is on the line and introduce themselves.
okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, we're going to move on then. We have no new business. We'll move on to unfinished business. Councilmember Smith, could you call for the third reading of 9176, please?
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to call for the third and final reading of Bill number 9176 and call for its subsequent adoption.
Second.
Bill 9176, third reading. An ordinance of the City of Webster Groves, Missouri, authorizing and directing the submission of a ballot proposition to the qualified voters of the City of Webster Groves, Missouri on April 5, 2022, to consider the question, quote, shall there be a charter review advisory board to make recommendations to the City Council to revise and amend the charter, unquote.
Any comments or questions? I have a few because I am not in support of this, even though I believe that we always have the ability to take a look at the charter. There are many ways in which we can do that. But, you know, in the past year, we've been through a lot in this town. We've had an initiative petition about duplex housing. We had the SG Collaborative Project. We have a city and council and city mayor election coming up. We had the rejection of the use tax. There's just been so much that's gone on, and I fear that throwing our charter open to a new board is not something that at this point I would support, because there is a process that is available to change the charter if we want. So that said,
Hiding from the issues is not going to solve or make the problems go away. You know, it's merely because that we aren't going to put a no vote tonight does not make these problems that we all know exist within our charter go away.
all right, let's call for the vote.
Yes, Mayor. Councilmember Arnold,
Yes.
Councilmember Bliss,
No, and that is in light of the idea of us deciding as a council to call for a charter advisory board at a time that we feel is important and is appropriate.
thank you. Councilmember Franklin,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Richardson,
Yes.
Mayor Welsh,
No. Okay, this will go on the ballot in April. All right, Councilmember Bliss, Bill 9177, please.
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to call for Bill number 9177, third reading and subsequent adoption.
Second.
Bill 9177, third reading. An ordinance of the city of Webster Groves, Missouri, amending chapter 42, licensing and regulation of liquor, article 1, intoxicating liquor, by amending section 42.023, licenses required, categories, and section 42.050, regulation of retail package sales, conditions of license, and matters related thereto.
Any comments or questions? Call for the vote.
Councilmember Bliss,
Yes.
Councilmember Franklin,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Richardson,
Yes.
Mayor Welsh,
Yes.
Councilmember Arnold.
Yes.
All right, Bill 9178.
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to move to table Bill number 9178.
Second.
Councilmember Franklin,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Richardson,
Yes.
Mayor Welsh,
Yes.
Councilmember Arnold,
Yes.
Councilmember Bliss.
Yes.
All right, 9178 has been tabled. The next agenda item is the consent agenda. Does anybody care to remove anything from? I have some questions, if I could ask them of the city before we vote on this, and that has to do with Resolution 2022-06. That's a pretty sizable expenditure for some Wi-Fi equipment. And what I wanted to know is, did we send this out as a proposal and get a couple of companies that responded? Tell me how we got to this company.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, so the company, the Insight bid, which you have before us, is for the total amount was, I believe, $65,000 as quoted in the purchase. That includes over 30 of the cloud controller and Wi-Fi access points that would be around the city. Insight was selected because they do have knowledge of our market and such, and they have been in our technology portfolio. There were 2 bids received. One through Omnia, the cooperative purchasing organization that used to be called US Communities. That bid was for $75,000.
Okay.
Insight beat that on the open market by 65,000. So under the cooperative purchasing laws, because we received a lower bid, lower than the other bid under the cooperative purchasing agreement, which was let by Fairfax County, Virginia, that was the bid that was that the IT department brought to me, and that was included in this. The reason it is before you tonight and why we've jump-started this process is the bid expires at the end of this month. So if the city wishes to move using these funds and on this quote into Wi-Fi, we wanted to give you that opportunity. If you choose not to, we will get rebids and such when and if you desire to move in that way. But this would lock that price in, which we do expect to increase with the way inflation and the supply chain is looking.
Can you explain to me and to the public where this fits in our technology plan and what this brings to the city?
Certainly. So Wi-Fi and VPN is a critical backbone now. It's when we look at this coming year, the budget, we are going to have to decide if we continue with leased computers. All of our computers, with the exception of a very few, are leased in the city, or purchase computers. The likely recommendation, I'll say likely, is to move to a purchase computer setup where employees have laptops to allow for remote working. But that also means around the city, the laptops you have, the laptops that department directors have, aren't accessible anywhere else in the building. You have to plug your laptop in to work on it in any room. So I think of Director Davis from Parks and Rec. When he comes to this office, he has no place to work. So he'll sit in the conference room and then has to plug into the wall to make his laptop work. That obviously is not, the current technology status that many markets are seeing. So what this provides, Wi-Fi, and there would be other expenses. Again, this is just locking in these pieces that we would buy, is both Wi-Fi across for the workforce, an internal secure network that only our machines could attach to and connect to, but then also the public would have Wi-Fi. So when you're in the council room here, there would be a public Wi-Fi that does not connect to our network and into our server system and provide that. And that would exist across all the city buildings, as well as a VPN. So a VPN means that when I am offsite and I want to get into our financial system and pull data for you, it creates a tunnel from where I'm at that is safe and secure, a virtual private network into our servers so that remote work can happen. That is what these pieces of equipment that we're proposing would allow to start. There would be further expenditures needed. There are other plans. We do need to implement some other cybersecurity measures. We've been informed by Slate that our cybersecurity insurance will be dependent on implementing them. Otherwise, we are uninsurable. So we will have some budget discussions this year, whether it be ARP or general fund or other funds, that we will need to implement cybersecurity updates.
And we are going to use the ARP funds for this purchase.
In light of the budget issue of the city, I have put this in as a resolution for ARP funding to use those funds, and rather than use the general fund, putting those conversations of if we're going to use the general fund or others in the budget process.
So this means that if somebody came to council, they would then have the ability to use Wi-Fi here in the council chamber,
That is correct.
which they don't have now. And how about the recreation complex?
We do have a Wi-Fi at the recreation complex right now, but it's just the basic network like you have at your home. So it has a very short bandwidth. So these are commercial grade fiber Wi-Fis that we'd be putting in. The recreation complex would have it, Firehouse 2 would have it, as well as the service center, so that our employees can go on the internal network wherever they're at, or the public that comes to visit.
Thank you for that. I think it's a good understanding now of where that $65,000 is going, and it helps our access with the public. Thank you very much. That was my question. All right. Anything else? Anybody else have anything they want to bring up on here? If not, we'll call for the vote on the consent agenda.
Do we need a motion?
Oh, yes, right. Mr. Franklin, can you move for the consent agenda?
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to move for the approval and adoption of the consent agenda.
Second.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Richardson,
Yes.
Mayor Welch,
Yes.
Councilmember Arnold,
Yes.
Councilmember Bliss.
Yes.
Councilmember Franklin.
Yes.
All right. And with that, I want to thank all of the 22 people who came this evening via Zoom. We're glad that you joined us, and we look forward to seeing you again in February. One of these days, we'll be back in person. So thank you for coming this evening. We appreciate your interest.
We're going to be going back.
We're going
reconvening in
back
closed
to
session.
closed session.